Today I'm going to show you a lesson for 5th grade called Pointillism. So for this project, they're going to make a piece of artwork in the style of Jerry Wilkerson. They'll have looked at his piece entitled Space Banana, and they're going to do a similar piece of art. So what they're going to do is they're going to pick a fruit or a vegetable, a carrot and grapes here. They can pick whatever they want, and they're going to make their fruit or vegetable space whatever the fruit or vegetable so that it is similar to Jerry Wilkerson's. So I'm going to give you a few ideas on how to make this project a little bit less tedious than it can be for the students. The students can kind of start to get a little frustrated or bored even filling in all of this space with paint because they're using the small dots. And so there's a few things that we can do to help get them through that. So the first one is you could start with colored paper. This would make it so that that background feels more filled in, even if they don't fill in every inch with dots. So with the space banana or whatever fruit or vegetable they choose, blue is a great color to start with. Or you could even use black. So just experiment with what color you're going to use and how the paints show up on it. The second thing that you could do is you could just give them a half sheet. You could just give them a half a sheet of paper. Then there's a lot less space to fill in. Finally, one more option you could do is you could have them fill in their fruit or vegetable with smaller dots, but then give them different brushes or materials to use larger dots in the background just to make it quicker to fill in. As I'm sure you've all experienced, there's a wide range of ability within each class. So sometimes you may even be able to give them an option of saying, hey, this is what it's going to look like if you use a whole piece of paper. If you think this is going to be too hard for you, I'll give you a half a sheet of paper, or I'll give you a colored sheet of paper. So you can give every student the same thing, or you can even let students decide how they'll best perform. So just some tips. Those are some things to start with that might help you. So have them first draw that fruit or vegetable in the center. And really simple. They don't want to add any detail, just an outline, because then we're going to fill it in with the dots. So then I like to have them come get their paint. I often like to just set up paint in the back of the room, and then they can come back and get colors as needed. It kind of makes it a little bit less crazy. And they don't have to get all their colors at once. So maybe they just come to the back and get the colors that they think they'll need for just their fruit or vegetable. So I'm going to give myself some red and some green and some brown. So I start them with their colors like this, and then the next thing I like to do is to, in that little bit of paint, add a little white to each color, and then they can mix these colors with a brush or the back of a brush and get some variation. So I just kind of mix the white on one side. It looks like I'm gonna need a little bit more white. Sometimes the pigment of the color is pretty strong. So by doing this, they don't have to have like separate piles of like dark red to light red. It just gives them some varying hues of the color, just like this. And that's actually a perfect place to start, is within this, they have a lot of different colors of red to pink, and then have them do the same with all the colors they're gonna use. They can just use the one color, just the plain green, just the plain. Having several different shades of the color just gives it the art a little bit more interest and depth. So I just like to start from there. Each of those colors, I have lots of varying shades to choose from. So the next thing is to have them choose what they're going to use to make their dots. So you can use anything from small to medium brushes. I do like using the brushes because you can really load up that brush with paint and do multiple dots rather than if you use the eraser of a pencil. It looks great, but they have to re-dip it in the paint every time. So it is a little bit more tedious. So it's up to you. And some of them will want to do that. So this is a great opportunity to let them experiment with things that they can find in the classroom, different sizes of dots. They can use, anything from the end of the brush to a pencil. They can experiment with whatever you've got in the classroom. And that's great. So then just have them start putting those dots and filling in that fruit and vegetable. I've filled in my apple in the middle. And one thing that you could tell them that works well is I like to start with larger dots and then go back with something smaller and fill in the little spaces. That kind of helps them, using the bigger dots first helps them to fill in the space more quickly, and then going back with some little dots just to fill in any little gaps. That works really well. And as you can see, there is the variation of color just by kind of mixing that paint a little bit. So now the next step is to kind of fill in the background. And this is where they can get a little bit frustrated just because it does take some time. So again, you could at this point cut down their paper so they have less to fill in. You could like chop the sides, or you can have them go ahead and fill in the whole background. I would recommend now using something a little bit larger for the background so that it doesn't feel tedious. And again, do the same thing with the paint. Give them a bunch of blue, and then mix in a little bit of white so they get a lot of different variations of color. One thing you may have noticed as I'm filling in these, I don't use water to clean my brush as I'm doing this, or the end of my brush. I just use a paper towel. I wipe the color off, and then you don't have to worry about dealing with water cups and things like that. The water makes the paint often too liquid so that it doesn't make really good dots. So I do like to just use the paint without water. And the paper towel cleans the brush off fine between colors. I haven't had any problem with the colors mixing too much. So I'm just gonna get a couple different variations of blue here. And if they need a little bit more white to get some lighter colors, then you can give them a little bit more. Okay, so now I've got several different shades of blue here. So now I'm gonna switch to something a little bit larger, either a larger end of a brush or a larger brush, just so I can fill in this background space more quickly without getting kind of bored of it. One more quick tip is with these dots, the paint doesn't dry very quickly. So I like to kind of teach them how to turn their paint as needed so that they're not going to be dragging their arm through their paint. Because if they're trying to fill in this space over here, if they accidentally drag their arm through it, they lose all those dots. So I kind of encourage them to keep turning the paper so that their arm is never going to drag through their paint. So you can see how by using a colored paper, it gives the illusion of being filled in more, rather than if this was a white piece of paper, the students would really feel like they need to fill in more with those dots, and it does take some time. So again, the colored paper and then using larger dots in the background will help them to fill the space more easily. As you can see, just by doing those kind of mixed paints with different variations in the color in the same spot, you can still get a lot of color variation on the paper. So showing them how to do that is a good way for them to add a little bit of interest to their paper. They could stop here. If they finish quickly, they could go back with smaller dots and fill in the background, or again, this is totally fine. I do like to have them use a little bit smaller of a dot on their fruit or vegetable, and then the larger dots. It does make that fruit or vegetable in the middle kind of pop out a little bit more. They'll have learned in their lesson how smaller, closer together dots make the paintings more clear rather than blurry, and they kind of can experiment with that in using the smaller, closer together dots in the center in the fruit or vegetable. So again, this is 5th grade Pointillism. I hope that the tips that I've shared with you help them to have a finished and successful project.